My name is Andrea Franks. I'm professor and assistant dean for Curricular Affairs in the College of Pharmacy. The effective teaching practice I'd like to share today is team-based learning. Like many new faculty, when I started teaching, I taught the way I was taught. So I prepared comprehensive lectures that were very content heavy because I really felt like that's what I needed to do for my students. I needed to give them as much information as possible so they would be prepared for the future. However, soon after I started teaching, something happened that really disrupted my beliefs about how to teach. I was in the clinical setting teaching in the experiential part of the curriculum, and I realized that when I would ask a student about something I had taught them in the classroom, or when a patient would come in with a condition that we had talked about, and I would ask them to apply what they learned in class to that patient, they didn't remember. So I realized at that point that just because you teach something doesn't mean anyone is actually learning it. Around that same time, I went to a professional meeting where there was a workshop on a topic that was new to me, collaborative learning, or working in groups as students. This was a very interesting concept to me because I could see how this would get learners more engaged, but I wasn't sure how to do it in our large classes. Thankfully, around that same time, I also learned about team-based learning, or TBL, which is a structured framework for collaborative learning. Team-based learning was implemented in one of my elective courses, and I designed it so that students did guided readings prior to class. They had reading objectives, so they came to class prepared. Then once we got in class, there were two main components that we tried to have consistent at every class session. The first part is the readiness assurance process, and the second part is application exercises, which is usually practicing cases or problems. In the readiness assurance process, the students would come in and immediately take a quiz. We did 10 questions and we allowed 10 minutes of time because this is focused on foundational fact type content. And then after the students take the individual readiness assurance test, or IRAT, they get with their groups and they do the same quiz as a team. Part of this process allows for the team members to discuss their answers, and if there were any that they didn't agree on, quickly talk through them, and that's when peer-to-peer teaching occurs. It's so satisfying to walk around the classroom and hear those discussions and hear the learners sharing their ideas and teaching each other. Once the readiness assurance process is concluded, that's when we get into the most important part of the class, the application exercises. These are complex, significant cases that represent real-world scenarios they're likely to see. I try to design them in a way that the points I want to get across come up, not through my teaching them, but by them working through the cases, choosing different answers that bring up a potential drug interaction or a potential contraindication that would make them choose one answer or the other. And they discover that themselves, or during the time that we report out and facilitate discussion between all the teams, they hear their peers explaining why their answer might or might not be correct. So this results in some really deep learning, some great practice of critical thinking, and practice in sharing not just what their decision is that they achieved as a team, but what their rationale for that is. And that is something that's very important as we prepare for clinical practice in those clinical scenarios where they'll be working with others to arrive at a patient care decision, but also being able to defend and justify that decision using evidence. There are so many reasons why I like using team-based learning in my teaching. One of them is that the students come to class prepared. They have this peer teaching that occurs as they work through problems together. You can hear them explaining their thought processes, and so you can identify misconceptions if you need to and address those. But also, you get to see the learning happening, and you see those light bulb moments that make most of us feel so satisfied as educators. It also gives them the opportunity to practice achieving consensus within a small group, which is great in preparing them for clinical practice. But furthermore, they get to take those recommendations, share them with a larger group, share their rationale, justify their answer based on evidence, which is also something they're going to need to do in the clinical setting. And then finally, just as a faculty member, it's so much fun to get myself out of the spotlight, let the learners be the focus of the class session, and hear their thinking, and really just be a facilitator rather than someone who's giving them a lot of information that they won't remember a couple of years later. Team-based learning has really changed the way that I teach by providing my learners with opportunities to learn from each other, come to class ready for lively discussions facilitated by a content expert who can help guide their learning as they discover what's really important and practice their clinical reasoning, communication, and team skills. I'm really glad I've implemented team-based learning in my teaching. Thank you for listening.